My name is Nicole Hodgen, and I was 28 years old when my father decided I was no longer welcome in the house I had just poured everything into. At the time, I didn't see it coming. That's the part that still makes me feel foolish. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. Small, quiet, inconvenient truths. I kept brushing aside because acknowledging them would have meant admitting something I wasn't ready to face. That my parents didn't see me as a daughter first. They saw me as help, as labor, as a resource to be used until something better came along. When my contract job ended, it wasn't dramatic. No big goodbye, no ceremony. One week I had a paycheck, the next I didn't. I had savings, enough to survive, not enough to relax. Rent, insurance, utilities, groceries, everything kept moving forward, whether I was ready or not. I told myself not to panic. I didn't want to be dramatic. I didn't want to feel like a failure. So I did what I'd always done when life cornered me. I tried to solve the problem quietly. Moving back in with my parents seemed like the obvious solution. Temporary, just a few months. They had the space. I could regroup, find something stable, get back on my feet. When I brought it up, they agreed almost immediately. Too quickly, actually. Of course, my dad said. That's what family is for. My mom nodded beside him, smiling faintly, already halfway checked out of the conversation. I remember feeling relieved. Grateful, even. That should have been my first clue, how relieved I felt to receive something that should have been normal. Then my dad cleared his throat. There is one thing, he added, casual, like he was mentioning the weather. The spare room needs work. That was putting it mildly. When I went to see it, my heart sank. The walls were cracked like dried riverbeds. The carpet was old, stained, and smelled faintly damp. The door didn't shut unless you lifted it just right. The hallway leading to the room had flickering lights, peeling paint, and floorboards that groaned under your weight. My dad leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, surveying the mess like it wasn't his responsibility. You've got renovation experience, you could find, he said. If you fix it up, you can stay here rent-free. Fair trade. He said it like he was doing me a favor. My mom stood behind him, quiet. She always went quiet when she knew something unfair was about to happen and didn't want to be the one to say it out loud. I hesitated, just for a second. But I told myself it made sense. I wasn't paying rent. I had the skills. And once it was done, I'd finally have my own space again, something that felt like mine. So I agreed. The first morning, I started early. I always did. There's something comforting about beginning work before the world wakes up. It feels like control, like progress. I ripped out the carpet first. The smell alone told me it had been overdue. Underneath, the subfloor felt soft. Not dangerously so, but enough to make me pause. I mentioned it to my dad. It's fine, he said. Just lay the new flooring over it. No need to overcomplicate things. That sentence would come back to haunt all of us. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I worked nonstop. Early mornings, late nights. My hands were constantly scraped or sore. I filled cracks in the walls, sanded them smooth, painted coat after coat until the room finally started to look alive again. I installed laminate flooring, built shelves into the walls, replaced the broken door. I fixed the hallway lights, repainted the ceiling, reinforced creaky boards. At first, I used whatever supplies were lying around, but it didn't take long to realize that if I wanted the job done right, I'd have to buy most of it myself. Paint, flooring, wood, tools, hardware. My parents never offered to pay, never asked how much it cost, never said thank you. And I didn't ask. Because in my mind, I wasn't doing this for them. I was building my own space. I slept on the couch during those 2 months, surrounded by drop cloths and paint cans, reminding myself it was temporary. Every night, I pictured moving into the finished room, putting my clothes away, sleeping in a bed that didn't have to be folded up each morning. I told myself it was worth it. By the time I finished, I had spent nearly $4,000. I didn't keep strict track. I didn't want to know the exact number. I just knew it felt like an investment. The room looked incredible, clean, modern, bright. It didn't feel like the rest of the house anymore. It felt like mine. That's when my dad asked to talk. My mom stood next to him, hands folded, expression blank. The same look she always wore when she'd already chosen his side. I waited for praise, for acknowledgement, for something. Instead, my dad said, "We've decided your sister is going to live here." At first, I laughed. A reflex, my brain scrambling to catch up. "What do you mean?" I asked. "It makes more sense," he said. "She needs the space more than you do." My sister, the one who already had an apartment, the one who lived with her boyfriend, the one who hadn't lifted a finger during the renovations. I looked at my mom. She nodded. That's when I knew. The deal had never been mine. For a long moment after my dad said it, no one spoke. The house felt suddenly too quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see how I'd react. I stood there, staring past them toward the hallway I'd just finished repainting. The fresh white walls still smelled faintly of paint and cleaner. The new light fixtures glowed warmly, like they were proud of themselves. "We talked about this," my dad continued, mistaking my silence for confusion instead of shock. "And it just makes more sense. Your sister's starting a new phase of her life." I swallowed. "So, when did you decide this?" He shrugged. That casual little movement, the one that said my effort was insignificant, made something tighten in my chest. "We've been thinking about it for a while. It's nothing personal." "Nothing personal." I looked at my mom again, hoping, stupidly, that she'd say something. Anything. That she'd acknowledge the work I'd done, the money I'd spent, the weeks I'd lived out of boxes and slept on a couch. Instead, she avoided my eyes. In that moment, I realized something that hurt more than the decision itself. They had never planned to tell me until the room was finished. I thought about the mornings I'd woken up sore, hands aching, hair still smelling like sawdust. The nights I'd stayed up late sealing shelves or fixing trim because I wanted it done right. The times I'd gone to the hardware store after work, swiping my card without hesitation because this was my room. Except it never was. I could have argued, I could have reminded them that my sister already had a place, that I'd spent thousands of dollars, that they'd promised I could stay. I could have raised my voice, demanded repayment, listed every sacrifice I'd made, but I knew them. Arguing would only turn it into a performance, one where I was emotional and unreasonable, and they were calm and logical. They would twist it until I was the problem. So I did the one thing they weren't expecting. I said nothing. I nodded once, slowly, like I was acknowledging the weather instead of being erased. Then I turned around. I went to the living room where my bags were still half unpacked, where my life had been paused for 2 months while I worked for them. I started folding clothes with deliberate care, as if I had all the time in the world. Behind me I could feel it, the tension, the surprise. They'd expected resistance, maybe even begging. But I refused to give them that. I packed quietly, efficiently. I didn't slam drawers or sigh dramatically. I didn't cry. I didn't accuse. I just moved through the room like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome and finally gotten the hint. My dad hovered nearby. "You don't have to leave right now," he said. "We can talk about arrangements." Arrangements. For where? The couch? A corner of the house that hadn't already been claimed? I didn't respond. I loaded my bags into my truck just as the sun was starting to set. The sky burned orange and pink, dramatic in a way that felt almost mocking. This was supposed to be the beginning of stability. Instead, it felt like the end of something I'd been clinging to for years. I drove away without looking back. That night, I slept in my truck outside a gas station. The seat wouldn't recline all the way, and every time a car pulled in, headlights flashed through the windows. I wrapped my jacket tighter around myself and stared at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over. Not just the conversation. The years before it. Every time I'd been expected to help out. Every holiday where my sister was praised for existing while I was thanked for what I contributed. Every time my parents talked about fairness like it was something I hadn't earned. By morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls from my dad, then my mom, then my sister. I didn't answer any of them. I drove to work like nothing had changed, showered in the gym locker room, and tried to focus. Around mid-morning, a text from my cousin Sarah came through. "Sarah, what did you do?" I frowned and typed back. "Me, what do you mean?" Her reply came almost immediately. "Sarah, your parents are freaking out. Your dad's talking about lawyers." Lawyers? My stomach dropped. For a second, panic flared. Had they reported something? Accused me of stealing? I replayed my exit in my head, making sure I hadn't taken anything that wasn't mine. I hadn't. Then Sarah called. "They're losing it," she said without preamble. "Your sister showed up to move in." "And?" I asked. "And the house smells like something died," she said. "She refused to stay. Your dad's furious. Your mom's crying." That's when it clicked. The subfloor. I'd warned my dad. More than once. I'd told him the wood felt soft, that moisture might be trapped underneath. He'd brushed it off, insisted I just lay the laminate over it. Now that moisture had nowhere to go. Sarah kept talking. "They pulled up part of the flooring. There's mold, like bad mold. Contractors are saying they might have to rip everything out." I closed my eyes. I didn't feel guilty. I felt validated. They're saying you ruined the house, Sarah added hesitantly. A laugh slipped out before I could stop it. No, I said. They did. By the next morning, the tone of the messages changed. My mom's texts were desperate. Nicole, please. We didn't realize how serious the damage was. Your father is overwhelmed. If you could come back and help finish things, we'd really appreciate it. Then my sister called. This is serious, she said, skipping any apology. The house is basically unlivable. I can't move in until it's fixed. I almost laughed. Then my dad called with an offer. Come back, he said. Help us fix everything. This time you won't be kicked out. You can stay as long as you need. I pictured the room again. The one I'd built. The one they'd taken. No, I said. He raised his voice. Be reasonable. This is your family. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Funny, I said. You didn't feel that way 2 days ago. And for the first time, I realized something important. Walking away hadn't been the mistake. Staying had been. I thought saying no would be the end of it. I thought once I'd made it clear, really clear, that I wasn't coming back, they would finally accept it. That they'd sit with the consequences of their decisions and figure it out themselves, the way I always had to. I underestimated how far they were willing to go to avoid responsibility. The calls didn't stop. They changed tone, cycling through panic, anger, guilt, and entitlement like a broken record. My dad left voicemails that sounded calm on the surface but sharp underneath, like he was biting down on his words. My mom's messages were longer, heavier, filled with phrases like, we didn't mean it, and family makes mistakes. My sister didn't bother pretending. This wouldn't have happened if you'd done it right, she texted. I stared at the screen for a long time before setting my phone face down. I was staying with Mike, an old coworker who'd taken me in without questions, without conditions. He gave me his spare room, handed me a towel, and told me to take the time I needed. No guilt, no leverage. The contrast was jarring. One night, while I was eating takeout at his kitchen table, my phone lit up again. This time, it was my dad. I'm coming by tomorrow, he said when I answered. We need to talk. I'm at work tomorrow, I replied evenly. I know, he said. I'll meet you there. That's when I felt it. That familiar twist of dread mixed with anger. He'd always done this. Showed up where he knew I couldn't walk away without looking like the problem. The next day, he was waiting outside my building when I arrived, arms crossed, jaw tight, like he was the one who'd been wronged. You embarrassed us, he said as soon as we were inside, away from prying ears. I laughed under my breath. You kicked me out. We offered you a solution. You offered me a couch, I said, after taking the room I paid for. He sighed dramatically, rubbing his forehead. Nicole, you're focusing on the wrong thing. That sentence snapped something in me. The wrong thing? I repeated. I spent 2 months fixing your house. I warned you about the damage. You ignored me. Then you gave the room away and told me it was nothing personal. He looked away. Your sister needs stability. So did I. Silence stretched between us. Your mother hasn't slept, he said finally. She's been crying nonstop. I shrugged. She slept fine the night you kicked me out. That did it? His face hardened. You're being cruel. No, I said quietly. I'm being done. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore, like the version of me who always folded, always helped, always absorbed the damage, had vanished. This doesn't have to be permanent, he said, lowering his voice. We're still your family. I met his eyes. No, you're just people I used to know. I walked past him and into my building without waiting for a response. That should have been the end. It wasn't. That night, Mike was scrolling on his phone when he started laughing. Not the amused kind, the uncomfortable kind. You might want to see this, he said, turning the screen toward me. It was my mom's Facebook post. She'd written paragraphs about her ungrateful daughter who'd abandoned the family during a crisis, about how she and my dad were struggling, how they'd only ever tried to help me, how I'd turned my back on them out of spite. There was no mention of kicking me out, no mention of the renovations, no mention of my sister. The comments were worse. How could she do that to her parents? Kids today have no loyalty. You deserve better. My stomach twisted, not with anger, but with something colder. An hour later, Sarah called. It's getting ugly, she said. They're telling people you stole tools, that you took materials when you left. That's why the house is falling apart. I laughed. I couldn't help it. They know I didn't, I said. Doesn't matter, Sarah replied. They need a villain. And suddenly, everything made sense. They weren't upset because I left. They were upset because I refused to play my role anymore. I didn't respond. I didn't post. I didn't defend myself. That silence drove them crazy. A week later, I signed the lease on a small apartment. Nothing fancy. Just mine. I moved in with the bare essentials and slept better than I had in months. Sarah kept me updated at first. How my parents told anyone who'd listen that I'd abandoned them. How my dad complained about contractors and money. How my sister blamed everyone but herself. Eventually, I asked her to stop. I didn't want updates. I wanted distance. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying their weight. And that freedom? It felt better than revenge ever could. For a while, the silence felt unreal. No calls, no texts, no dramatic voicemails from my dad, no guilt-soaked messages from my mom. It was like they'd finally exhausted every angle and decided retreat was easier than accountability. I should have known better. The quiet didn't mean peace. It meant regrouping. About 3 weeks after I moved into my apartment, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something told me not to. It was my aunt. "I just wanted to hear your side," she said carefully, like she was stepping onto thin ice. "Your parents are really struggling." I leaned back against my kitchen counter and closed my eyes. The apartment still smelled like cardboard boxes and fresh paint. It was small, but it was calm. "They kicked me out," I said simply. "After I renovated the room, after I paid for it. That's my side." There was a pause, then a sigh. "I thought so," she said quietly. That was the moment I understood something important. They hadn't convinced everyone. They'd just been loud. Over the next few days, bits and pieces filtered back to me, despite my best efforts to stay detached. Contractors refusing to work without upfront payment, the mold spreading beyond the bedroom, the hallway ceiling needing to be torn open, costs climbing into numbers my parents weren't prepared for. The house they were so quick to take from me? It still couldn't be lived in. Then came the last attempt. My mom showed up at my apartment. I hadn't told her where I lived. That meant someone else had. The realization stung, but not enough to open old wounds. When I opened the door, she looked smaller, older. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back like she hadn't bothered to style it. "I just want to talk," she said. I stepped aside and let her in. She looked around the apartment like she was assessing it, measuring, comparing. That old habit of evaluating whether my life met her invisible standards. "We're in a really bad situation," she began. "Your father's under so much stress." I waited. She clasped her hands together. "If you came back, even temporarily, you could help us finish the repairs. We could work something out. We didn't mean for things to go this far." There it was. Not an apology, a negotiation. "I warned him," I said calmly, "about the subfloor, about the moisture." He ignored me. She nodded quickly. "We know. We just didn't realize—" "You didn't listen," I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "And then you kicked me out." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're our daughter." I held her gaze. "Then you should have treated me like one." Silence settled between us. Heavy. Final. "I'm not coming back," I said. "Not to fix the house, not to fix the family." She wiped her eyes, nodding like she already knew. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "We never thought you'd really walk away," she admitted. "I know," I said. "That's why you didn't think you had to choose me." After she left, I sat on the floor and let myself feel it. Not anger, not sadness, but something quieter. Acceptance. I blocked their numbers that night. Changed mine the next week. The world didn't collapse. No alarms went off. Life kept moving. And so did I. Months later, I heard through Sarah that the repairs cost more than my parents could manage. That my sister never moved in. That the house still had rooms no one used because fixing them meant admitting fault. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. I stopped defining myself by how much I could give. I stopped confusing endurance with love. I stopped hoping they'd someday wake up and see me differently. Because I finally did. I wasn't disposable. I wasn't difficult. I wasn't selfish for leaving. I was just done being the only one paying the price. And walking away? It wasn't abandonment. It was self-respect.